Tiger Talk is brought to you by String Beans Coffee House on Lower Main in Princeton, Hancock's Neighborhood Market on Commerce Street and Katie's delicious homemade goodness, and Perry's Floors and More. String Beans Coffee House in downtown Princeton specializes in made-to-order espresso drinks. Stop by Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to noon and enjoy a pick-me-up. You can also enjoy fresh-baked scones, homemade chocolate chip and oatmeal raisin cookies, and espresso brownies that'll keep you going all day long. They're also open on Saturday from 9 to 2. String Beans Coffee House on Lower Main in Princeton. Great coffee and more in a great atmosphere on Lower Main in downtown Princeton.
And
good morning and welcome to Tiger Talk at 8:05 on this Tuesday morning, and we hope you're off to a wonderful Tuesday start to your morning. And we have the pleasure of welcoming to Tiger Talk this morning Richard Nelson. He's director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. And good morning to you, sir.
Well, good morning, Ty.
It's nice to have you back.
It's nice to be here. It's nice that we have a great day, good weather in front of us. I think the last time I was here it was cold, rainy, overcast, and it seems like spring has finally sprung.
It finally has sprung, and can't ask for better weather that we're going to have. Maybe have some showers later in the week, but they clear up for the weekend. So that always puts, I think, everyone in a good mood, and welcome to May.
Yes, welcome to May. Hey, you know, when I find for myself, the older I get, the more I appreciate good weather. It really does affect my mood. And when the sun is shining and when it's warm, boy, it just makes for a good day.
It does, and the winters just seem to be very long this year, hasn't it?
That's right.
So,
it has.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you, and lots of happenings and things going on since your last visit last month.
Yeah.
So why don't you get us up to date on some of the things going on and some of the things that the Commonwealth Policy Center is monitoring around the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And, of course, for the listeners not familiar with us, the Commonwealth Policy Center is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy group started in 2012 with the goal of raising up conservative candidates, those who are committed to the sanctity of life, religious freedom, marriage between a man and a woman, and fiscal integrity. We see those issues, by the way, as pillars of society, life, marriage, religious freedom especially, pillars of society. And we realize that, Ty, just as one group, that we would be one voice, might have some impact, but we would multiply our impact if we would raise up other leaders who are like-minded, those who could serve in Frankfort to actually work for legislation that would help shore up the pillars. And when we started in 2012, we had a lofty goal, and that was to get a principled conservative majority elected to the state house. That's where many of our conservative issues would die year after year. Anyways, in 2016, we saw that vision come into reality of not just a few, that gave a majority, but it was a supermajority that was elected in 2016. And since then, we've seen amazing things happen. And we can talk about big picture things, for example, of 5 pro-life bills have been enacted in law just in the last 2 years here in Kentucky. We've seen 2 religious freedom laws passed, one that would help protect the religious freedom rights of students and of teachers. There's another religious freedom / conscience bill that protected the conscience and religious freedom rights of elected officials. That bill passed a couple years ago. We've seen some good bills that have attracted businesses that shore up the fiscal position, the fiscal strength of the Commonwealth, all within a very short period of time. And I think that we sometimes lose sight of that big picture of here's what's happened in this window of time. And I'm pleased to be able to take a step back and to see all of the good things that have happened. You look at this last legislative session, and I don't know how many of the listeners have been following newspapers, newspaper reports, radio, even watching some TV. But if you were to just plug into the mainstream thought as to how this session went, Many of the stories were about the protests against pension reform. There were a lot of news stories about missteps that the governor took, unfortunate things that have been said on both sides, the governor and his detractors. But if you just got, I guess, a general sense of what the mainstream reporting was, you'd think it was a failure. You'd think that this last session didn't accomplish a lot. You'd come out believing that the governor had it in for teachers and for state workers. You'd come out believing that state workers might face losing their pension entirely. A lot of misperceptions came from the reporting. Case in point, I'm in Trigg County, hometown paper there 2 weeks ago, had a headline story about the protests and what was happening. I'll see if I can dig up this quote, but it was unfortunate how they reported. They gave the idea that teachers and state workers were protesting because they were about to lose their pension and might lose their health care. Here's the quote, if I can find it, and this is worth digging through to share. Sure. Here's the first paragraph of this column in the Cato's Record, and I say this not to pick on the Cato's Record. We take the paper; they do a good job overall. But there was a reporter there who really was not on top of what was happening. So this was an April 18th headline story, that said that state workers had a difficult week due to House Bill 151 significantly cutting health care and pensions. Now, Ty, that couldn't be further from the truth, because that's not what House Bill 151 did. It did not significantly cut health care and pensions one bit at all. What that bill did, if anything, for existing teachers, first of all, let me take a step back and slow down. The idea of pension reform is to save the pension. It's not to hurt teachers or state workers, but it was to salvage the worst funded pension system in the country. If something is not done, there will not be a pension in 4, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it might be. So the intention was by the legislature and the governor to save the system. Right. And changes have to be made. Structural changes have to be made for new hires. They can't just go into a state pension. And just like you've been in the business world, in most businesses, if you want to have retirement, you put something in, and then that company will match what you put in. Well, for future hires, what House Bill 151 did was it required new hires to participate in a cash hybrid plan. They'd have to, it's like a 401k type plan.
Similar. Now, what would you, not meaning to interrupt you here, but I had some retired teachers in on this show in particular, and have several friends that are teachers. And what would you tell those educators that their concern is about a lot of this legislation was, especially with the hybrid plan, is that, the future teachers, the ones that are wanting, first of all, they're not going to draw some of the best minds that could potentially teach, because, it might not be, the benefit package for them is not what it has been in the past. So therefore, they're not going to draw maybe some people that would be talented to teach. Therefore, that could potentially impact the education of our kids here in Kentucky by not getting good people and qualified people to teach, and it could affect education down the road here in the state. What do you say to those folks and the teachers? 'Cause I think that was a big concern of theirs, was that, here we are, we've had, it's not necessarily about us, we're going to be okay, but what about the future teachers coming into the state, into the field, that, we might miss out on some really good folks that could be teaching our kids in the future.
Yeah, I think that's one of the strongest arguments, I think. Are we deterring good potential future teachers from joining the profession? And I need to say that I appreciate teachers. I think that teachers should be treated well by the state. But I also think that as it is, teachers are treated very well. You can retire after 27, 28 years of service. You're not working, the summer months, and you have long spring and fall break, Christmas break. You have very good benefits. You can retire at the age of, in Kentucky, in your 40s yet, with your 27 years of employment. and retire and start drawing on that pension and then begin working another job. I think that's being treated very well. There are very few professions that you have that much time off where you can retire after 27 years service and then begin drawing that pension and then go back to work. So I think that they are treated well. I think the way to look at this issue is that there is a crisis here. Yeah. The pension system is very, very broken, and it needs structural changes. It's not just the amount of money that is going in. There was a KTRS, Kentucky Teacher Retirement System actuarial person who said in 2015 that only 20% of the problem is funding. 80% of the problem is structural. That means it has to change. It's an undue burden on the state. It's an insurmountable burden. So they changed it for new hires that they have to participate in a 401k type, a cash hybrid plan, which is still a good plan. And Ty, I don't think that's going to discourage good teachers. They still have a good retirement. And by the way, they're still guaranteed that retirement. So I find this a case of the best I can gather what's happened. And of course, we saw the protests and we read the news reports, and there was a lot of angst. There was a lot of frustration there. I think a lot of people were fed bad information. I think that the flames were fanned by the KEA, the Kentucky Educators Association, for whatever reasons. Saying the sky is falling, they're after your retirement, they want to cut you. That's baloney. And the intention, as I said earlier, was to save the system and to improve it. They weren't out to hurt anybody, but the truth is that it takes some amount of change, and change is uncomfortable, and especially when you're talking about the pension system that has been in place for several years. But if that change doesn't take place, what's the option?
Yeah,
there's not a whole lot to look forward to.
Well, another thing, and I'll point this out. I've talked to several folks that have served in the legislature since that time, but I think there was also a little bit of the way the pension bill got pushed through, attached to the water sewer type bill. That also, I think, left a very bad taste in many teachers' minds and just how it went down. But as I spoke to several, some retired, some current, things like that happen. A lot of these, these bills and this legislation, it's been tossed around, turned around, and then you get something that's been basically approved through the committees, and you've got deadlines you have to meet, and you have to get these things through, and they just get attached to them and passed.
That's part of the process, to have a bill that's moving through and then to attach an amendment onto it.
Right.
Happens all the time in Frankfurt. And for those not aware of the process and how it works, that might have seemed alarming.
Exactly.
Of course, the optic was bad. You've got this sewer infrastructure bill, and then you can attack on the pensions. It made for a lot of fodder for talking points against it,
and
a lot of jokes.
And it makes for a lot of misunderstanding.
Yeah,
it really does.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why you're here today, is just to talk about these things and to clarify.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, if any of you have questions, feel free to send me an email. I don't know if I can get it right now, but you can send it to richard@commonwealthpolicy.org.
Oh, they can text. I have a text line.
Oh, yeah.
They can do that if you're open to that. I'll
Absolutely.
Give this out.
Hey, I'd love to take questions from the audience.
This could be 270-963-9038. And text a question to Richard if you like. I can get those immediately, and I can pass those on. And please, of course, make them tasteful, and he'll do his best to answer. If you have a question, if you're out there listening, we'd be glad to take it. But go right ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no. Hey, this is a good conversation. It's one that we need to have. And Ty, I appreciate that we can have these conversations.
Sure.
Here we are in the greatest, freest country on the face of the earth, and we're talking about our government and legislation. And you and I both have an influence, and the listeners have an influence. And before we even got on the air, we were talking about the freedom to participate in elections. And sometimes I think we take that for granted, just to choose our political leaders. We take it for granted, just freedom of speech.
Yeah.
I am so grateful. And for me, maybe it hits home more than most people because I'm on the radio across the state. I do a couple of different programs regularly. And I just appreciate this freedom that we have here to talk about ideas, to talk about the government, to talk about politics, for or against. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. We need to realize that we're all blessed as Americans, as Kentuckians, to have these freedoms, because the truth is, most of the world doesn't enjoy this.
And you're exactly right.
You couldn't go to most nations in Africa. They wouldn't have this freedom, or at least the freedom without fear of repression or reprisal.
Right.
In most Asian countries, the Middle East, most of the world, they do not enjoy what we enjoy. And I want to encourage the listeners to sit and contemplate the freedoms that we have and to not take them for granted. I want to segue into what's coming up, how you can preserve these freedoms. We have a primary coming up.
We do.
Just 3 weeks from tomorrow, in fact, where the polls will open, and we'll have an opportunity to demonstrate or to exercise our civic freedom to elect our leaders. And here in Caldwell County, you have a number of people on the ballot, I believe a number of primary races. I encourage you to find out more about these candidates, find where they stand on the issues, see if they line up with your values, and then make sure you go out to vote. Ty, the last election cycle, primary election, the voter turnout was less than 20%.
Yeah.
Statewide turnout, very, very low.
I try to go every chance I get. And, of course, I think I've heard that there are some, and we'll keep you informed more about this, there has been an effort to get some sort of political forum here in our county done, and I think it's going to be on Saturday the 12th, and we'll have more information on that as we get everything lined up and confirmed. But that's always good because you can meet the candidates, hear where they stand on issues, and it's always nice. And, of course, I will have candidates on the radio. I'm planning to invite everyone between now and election time to come in and have a little time on the air to just talk.
That's good.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a great resource that the radio station provides, that you're able to help the listeners in the community understand about the candidates and where they are on the issues. So
yeah. So if you're a candidate out there and you're hearing this for the first time, I haven't contacted you by phone yet, but if you want to go ahead and contact me and we can get that arranged, to be glad to do so. So.
Yeah. Hey, just a couple of loose ends on the pension bill, and I don't know if we've got any questions, but love to take any questions that some of the.
If you're out there listening, 270-963-9038. Go ahead.
The major change that was made to existing teachers, the only significant change to teachers and state retirees, is that they cannot use sick days towards their retirement. So they get a certain number of sick days every year, and those, if you don't use them, they could be accumulated and count towards their total retirement. That has been taken out after December of this year. They cannot do that. They will respect all those who have accumulated sick days to the end of this year. They will be considered, but after December of 2018,
they can't use those anymore.
Then you can't. And again, that's one way they're trying to help improve the solvency of the state pension system. Future hires, as we mentioned, they've got to participate in the hybrid plan. Other than that, there have not been a whole lot of changes. There still need to be some structural changes to the system if it's going to be shored up, and I do expect those to take place.
Well, one more question before we get away from this. In your understanding, I've heard different things. Then you find out, why were we the worst funded pension program? What happened? I know they were saying, well, you can't, estimates on growth in what we were invested in weren't what, were anticipated. And yeah, that's that was some poor planning possibly. But in your opinion, and in what you know and what the Policy Center has looked at, why were we? And this is just your opinion or what you've heard.
Yeah.
Why was the Kentucky pension system the worst funded in the nation? One of them.
Ty, there are a number of reasons. One is it has been severely underfunded. It's only been fully funded in 7 out of the last 22 years. Each year, the state legislature allocates money to the pension system. It's only been fully funded at the required amount by law, 7 out of 22 years. In the 22-year time period, there have been new systems, 20 or 30-year time period, new retirees have been added to the system without really making structural changes to make sure that the money would be there. That's another thing. But then also the returns, the investments that have been made have not brought in the amount that was projected over several years. So you had a number of factors that went into it. Here's something, too, that I think has been talked about but really needs to be addressed, and there's this idea of double dipping. Double dipping is where if you work one state job, whether it's a teacher or other state position, and retire after 27 years, you could begin drawing that retirement and then go to work for another state agency and start another retirement.
Right.
And there's something really, really wrong with that picture. I mean, retirement is supposed to be there for when you need it, when you can no longer work, when you're elderly and you need to depend on income because you're just not able to work anymore. But this idea of double dipping has really hurt as well. Right. And that's something that I'm not sure it was fully addressed, but it should be. I think the issue of early retirement, I think that you should work until you can't work anymore. I think 27 years, quite frankly, is not a lot of time into the system and then to begin drawing. In the business world, you've got to work until you're into your 60s. You can begin drawing Social Security 62, 65, something like that. I know there are different ages there depending on how many benefits you want to get, but that's something that we should talk about as well.
Well, and do you feel you mentioned it was only fully funded 7 years out of the 22. Were we let down by our representatives there?
I would say yes. Unfortunately, many representatives allow that to happen, but many governors. The governors have a lot of influence when it comes to funding priorities, and many proposed budgets by Governor Bashir allowed for this to happen.
Because at some time you have to pay the piper.
You got it. Now, short term, it might look good if you're going to bring projects to your community, build roads, and those things are important. But if you're doing it at the expense of a state pension, which so many people are requiring and depending on, you're really not doing a favor to anybody. Short term, it might look good. It might help you get reelected. Long term, it's really not helping the Commonwealth.
Because it's kind of like saying, well, I'm going to put $20 everything I make in my can here, in my coffee can, and then all of a sudden, and I'm going to do that, say, for 50 years, but all of a sudden, you don't put that 20 in every year. You only put it in, maybe half of that.
Yeah, and you're not going to have the money you were counting on.
Exactly. So, it's pretty simple. Yeah. The formula is simple.
It is. Now, since this is an election year, this is an opportunity for voters to ask their legislators what they think about this issue. What's your solution? What have you been doing in Frankfort? As far as the State House, now in Princeton, Lynn Beckler is your current state representative. He has a challenger. There's a primary challenge against Lynn. Fred Stubblefield from Marion is challenging him. So, hey, if you're registered to vote, make sure you get out and vote in the primary election coming up. It's 3 weeks from tomorrow. Find out about Lynn and Fred and where they stand. And I know just the place where they can find information about the candidates. A group called the Commonwealth Policy Center has information. We had sent out a questionnaire on many of these issues. And
you can go to that website.
Yeah.
It's a good spot, and that is CommonwealthPolicyCenter.org.
That's correct. I'd love for you to visit that, check it out. You'll find information under the political tab. There's a drop-down box, and you can find out about the candidates, and on the right of that, it will say voter guide. Yeah. So check that out. Ty, I don't know if you're going to take a break or if I can go into another.
Let's take a break, and then we'll come back. And I know there's lots of things to talk about. We've already got a half hour gone, and of course that was a pretty important one. We could have a half hour on that one and still haven't talked to it. But we do welcome Richard Nelson is here. He's the director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. He'd be glad to. We haven't done this before. Of course, we're not taking phone calls, but if you have a question you'd like to text to Richard, do so, please. Anything that you've heard or would like to discuss, 270-963-9038. That's the text line. It'll come right here to the studio, and we'll try to get it answered for you. At 8:28, we're going to take a break here on Tiger Talk. You're listening to Tiger Talk. Our guest today, Richard Nelson. He's the director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hancock's Neighborhood Market on Commerce Street in Cadiz is the place to shop for delicious homemade goodness. Hancock's makes their own fresh chicken salad, pimento cheese, salads, and a variety of mouth-watering desserts, sure to please your entire family. While at Hancock's, be sure to visit their meat department for the best selection of USDA choice meats in the area. Hancock's Neighborhood Market in Cadiz, hometown, homemade goodness, and the Hancock name you know and trust for quality for your family. Hancock's Neighborhood Market on Commerce Street in Cadiz.
Since 1978, Perry's Floors and More has been selling, installing, and servicing homeowners throughout Western Kentucky with quality flooring and workmanship. Perry's Floors and More carries luxury vinyl plank and luxury vinyl tile, carpet, window treatments, and more. Quality brands like Mannington, Shaw, Tarkett, Beaulieu, and Flexitech. There's a reason why we say you can walk on our reputation. Come see Bill and Lucy at 127 West Market Street or call 270-365-9869.
And we are back on Tiger Talk at right at about 8:30, Richard. And again, we thank you so much for being here. Richard Nelson is our guest today on Tiger Talk, and he is the director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. And if you don't know what that is or would like to know more about that, then we encourage you to go to www.commonwealthpolicycenter.org. And lots of good, positive things going on in our state as well.
There really are, and we began last hour with the idea that if you just follow the mainstream news reports, you'd have the idea, the perception that not a lot happened, that it was a negative, unproductive session, and really that couldn't be further from the truth. And I want to share a number of bills that really indicate what has been going on in Frankfort. I think one of the most important bills was House Bill 1. And what it did, Ty, is it streamlined adoption, the adoption process, and also improved foster care. It reduced the number of days acceptable by the state for kids to be allowed in foster care without finding a permanent home for them to be in. It also terminated parental rights for deadbeat dads who had no interest in their children. They weren't there before the child was born, they weren't there after, and it expedited that in order for that child to be adopted by parents who wanted to care for that child. Another provision that was passed by the legislature increased the amount of money for social service workers. $60 million additional dollars will be put into the budget to hire new social service workers specifically to help foster children and to help expedite that process. So that was a major priority, major shift, I think, for the better. Right now, there are 9,000 kids in foster care in Kentucky. There's a major public service announcement effort to encourage people to consider foster care. These kids need a place to stay. They need homes. A lot of these... and
good guidance.
Yeah, good guidance, good role models. And I know that there are people listening here in Caldwell County that are in a position to be foster parents and consider doing that. So that foster care and adoption care or adoption streamlining was a priority. That did pass into law. We saw regarding education funding, again, you'd have the perception that the legislature and the governor went after education. Couldn't be further from the truth. There was a record high number of dollars spent on per student spending, $4,000 in SEEK funding spent per student in Kentucky. And this is state funding that follows the students, whatever school district they're in. That was increased to $4,000. That's record high funding. The issue of crime was addressed. There's a bill called Marcy's Law, which acknowledged that crime victims have rights. For example, one of those rights is that if your perpetrator is up for parole, you should know about that. Or if the perpetrator is about to be released from jail, you should be notified about that. There are a number of other rights that were outlined as well. This bill passed. It took a few years to get it enacted, but it passed. It will be on the ballot this November. The November 6th general election, the crime victims' rights is on the ballot, and I think that's a good thing.
That'll be in the general election in November.
That's correct. That's correct. Another bill dealing with the issue of crime, House Bill 169, imposed penalties for criminal gang-related activity. So if you're a gang and if you're recruiting other young people to be in your gang, and then if you go out and commit a crime, you will have increased penalties imposed on you. That passed and was signed into law as well. House Bill 152 strengthens human trafficking laws by requiring any operator of a commercial vehicle to take some training to help them identify possible victims of trafficking. The CDLs, truck drivers, are on the roads. They're at gas stations and restaurants all across the country. And so they can be eyes and ears to help stop trafficking.
And seeing this more and more, I think people are really starting to be informed about this tragedy of human trafficking.
You know, Ty, stop and think about this for a minute. 10 years ago, this was not a conversation piece. We
never heard the term.
We didn't know what it was, but
No.
but it has been going on across the world, across the globe. But now it's coming here to this country, and what we're seeing more and more is that when there's a major event, the Super Bowl, we've got a major event coming up in Kentucky in just next week, the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
And so whenever there are major events, you see sex trafficking is what it's called, and you have these young girls that are often trafficked, which is very tragic, very, very sad. And so legislation has gone through Frankfurt that would help to put an end to this, and that's something that I'm glad to see our legislators addressing. When you look at other life issues, pro-life legislation, I mentioned that in the last 2 years or so, 5 pro-life bills have been enacted. Well, this last session, two of those happened this last session. One would have prohibited what are called telemed abortions. This is where an abortionist could get on the phone and advise a woman seeking an abortion how to do it, how to take medicine. A lot of it is through chemical abortion. You take a pill. It's a 2-part process. And what Senate Bill 112 does is it says, no, abortionists cannot counsel or advise or tell a woman how to do an abortion over the phone. They have to be face-to-face. I think that's good. That's a good practice. That's good medical practice. I don't agree with abortion. I think that's a bad thing. But as far as a patient being present with the doctor, I think that's a good thing. It's in the best interest of the woman. And then also there was a bill, House Bill 454, which banned a gruesome procedure called dismemberment abortion. When you read the language of the bill, very graphic, very sad when you really think about what's happening, and I'll spare the listeners the details. But that type of abortion procedure was banned. And then also all abortions after 11 weeks were banned in Kentucky. That bill passed by wide margins in both the House and the Senate. It was a bipartisan. Then signed into law immediately by Governor Bevin. Kentucky is a pro-life state, and this bill, this House Bill 454, reveals just how pro-life we are, because if that is upheld, it has been challenged in court, but if it is upheld, it makes Kentucky, to my understanding, the most pro-life state in the nation. Mississippi has the next closest pro-life laws or abortion restrictions. They ban abortions after 15 weeks. This bill would ban abortions in Kentucky after 11 weeks.
I saw something about a new bill in Ohio, but I don't know the specifics of it. And that's very, very recent. And I don't know what the news source was. I don't want to say anything, but it was pretty heavy duty for very pro-life. But that was just within the last few days.
The trend has been the country is pro-life. The middle part of the country, you get away from California or from the East Coast, New England area, most of the country's pro-life. Most Americans understand that this is a vulnerable, very small, innocent human life. And therefore, legislators are campaigning on that issue. They're saying, I want to enact pro-life legislation. So you're seeing the results of pro-life laws. Just in the last 7-8 years, there have been more than 400 pro-life laws enacted at the state level across the country. So this is a reflection of where the values of the people are. And I think Kentucky is going to continue to move in a pro-life direction. And this is important. This is one of the first objects of good government, is to protect innocent human life. And we're seeing our legislature do that. And I'm very proud of Lynn Beckler. He's your state representative. He is very pro-life, and he supported that bill. I think of others in the listening area that got behind that, who are in the state house, the state reps from Trigg County, the state reps from across the lake over in Callaway County, Kenny Imes. They are pro-life, and they're voting for this legislation. I think that's a good thing for Kentucky.
Again, if you have a question for Richard or would like to comment, 270-963-9038. We've got a few more minutes we're going to be on.
Yeah. Another important bill that passed was Senate Bill 71, which required the teaching of abstinence education in the public schools. Wherever there's a sex education class, teachers have to teach that the 100% way to avoid sexually transmitted disease or unplanned pregnancy is abstinence before marriage. This bill also required to teach that marriage is between a man and a woman. Now, this was stuff that you and I were taught, I think, in the public schools. The generations before us were taught, but now it's controversial. There was opposition to this bill, but it eventually passed. Once it made it out of committee, it passed into law by, again, wide margins. And the law of the land is now that if you're teaching sex education in Kentucky public schools, the young people need to hear abstinence before marriage, and then also marriages between a man and a woman. And this is something that I think is a good thing. It's marriage is the most basic relationship in society. Sexual activities, sex should take place in marriage. And parents, I know this can be uncomfortable to talk about sometimes, but your kids need to hear it. They're gonna learn it from someplace, but they should hear it from you.
Have the old birds and the bees talk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Look, kids do want to know, and they do want to have boundaries. They might push against those boundaries. They might rebel and go off in a direction, but it does sink in what you tell them. And as a society, we need to begin reintroducing boundaries because right now, quite frankly, we're out of control in so many different areas. We don't understand what marriage is. We don't understand what gender means. If a guy wakes up in the morning and thinks he's a woman and wants to become a woman, not only is that acceptable, but Ty, you're supposed to agree with that. I'm supposed to agree with that, and there's something wrong with that picture. And I say that not to be hateful, not to put down other people, but the truth is that society lasts only as long as it recognizes that there are moral boundaries. And we've thrust all those boundaries aside, and we cannot continue down this path and hope to maintain our freedom and our liberty and the blessings of God, so long as we continue to rebel against those things that God has instituted. So that's one of the things the Commonwealth Policy Center is doing, trying to reintroduce the idea that, yes, there's a God who gives us our rights and our liberties, and there are moral boundaries by which we ought to abide by, which we ought to respect. And if we respect those boundaries, if we do life within those boundaries, then we've got an opportunity for liberty and for prosperity and for human flourishing. But when we step outside those boundaries, just like I think of a guardrail on the side of a mountain. That guardrail is there in case you lose control and get too close to the edge. It's going to keep you from going over the cliff. But if you don't have that guardrail there and you happen to lose control, maybe it's a little slippery or rainy, boy, if that tire goes over the edge, that's it. It's a disaster. And culture is, in a similar way, needs to recognize that there are boundaries for our own good, for our own safety. And so long as we respect those boundaries, I think there's an opportunity to continue on, to be blessed, to pursue life as God would have us to pursue it.
Yeah. So. Well said. And let's talk about, and I don't want to throw you off. You got your notes there, but I saw some very good numbers about unemployment, and I believe the Commonwealth Policy Center minute this morning was concerning our good unemployment numbers here in the Commonwealth.
Hey, I love to talk about good news, and when it comes to the economy in Kentucky, we're in a time of incredible prosperity and in a time of incredible economic expansion, and this can be pointed back to legislation last session, in fact, that changed the financial picture of Kentucky. It made it more business friendly. Easier to do business. In fact, there's something that has accompanied this as well. There's something called the Red Tape Reduction Initiative, which helps to cut bureaucracy and red tape for those existing businesses and new businesses that want to start up. So because of these initiatives and legislation, we saw last year alone $9.2 billion in new investment. A lot of money. These are new businesses coming in. I think of the Amazon plant up in northern Kentucky. We saw the expansion of the Toyota plant in Georgetown. We saw the aluminum plant in eastern Kentucky. Major initiatives of companies coming into Kentucky and investing because of policy changes. Right. So that investment is paying off because when businesses come in, then what do? They hire.
I hire people, sure.
and
generate, and the more people they hire, then therefore they throw back into the local economy, and it's a party.
And that's a good thing.
That's a great
thing.
So
the latest numbers on unemployment are that Kentucky's at 4%. We're at an all-time low since the numbers were first kept back in 1976. The Department of Labor Statistics started to tabulate how many people were working, how many people were out of work. Kentucky is now at an all-time low unemployment of 4%.
Yeah,
which is virtual 100% employment. If you were to go even anywhere in town here in Caldwell County, if I were to go to places in Trigg County, I'm regularly seeing signs that say help wanted.
Sure.
Not just fast food, but other businesses as well. They're looking to hire good people.
Exactly.
Hey, part of this too, Ty, has come about because of federal waiver. Governor Bevin applied with the federal government regarding the Medicaid program. And previously, if you were unemployed, if you had no income, you could apply for medical assistance from the government. And what the governor said is, okay, that's okay, but if you're able-bodied between the ages of 18 and 59, if you're not working or going to school, we're going to ask something of you, and we're going to ask you to go back to school, or work part-time, 20 hours a week. Two reasonable things, by the way. It would not affect primary caregivers of children or primary caregivers of parents or other family members. There were some other exemptions. If you're not medically able, if you were, consistently or regularly sick, many exemptions. But it was estimated to impact about 100,000 people who were within those parameters. 18 to 64, able-bodied, weren't providing for somebody else. They weren't perpetually sick. It would say you need to go back to school or work part-time. That has contributed to a lower unemployment as well. And I say that by this. I'm not sure if everything has gone into effect, but the word has gotten out that, look, if you're on Medicaid, you're going to have to do something.
Right.
So that is helping to reduce the Medicaid rolls as well. And I applaud Governor Bevin for doing that, for taking the initiative and to lead on that. That's something that's not just practical, that, look, you should be working if you're able to, but it also affords human dignity to those who aren't doing anything. They need a little nudge and a little encouragement because, Ty, when you work, it brings dignity to yourself. You're doing something not just for yourself, you're providing, but you're providing for other people.
Yeah.
Family, you're providing for the community. This radio station is a good thing for the community.
I hope so.
And I'm glad. Look, hey, it wouldn't be happening if you were sitting at home and you weren't working.
You're right. And I think I'd go crazy, but
you and me both.
Every time I go on vacation, I sit there and I go, man, I got to be doing something. I mean, I feel, I don't know. I'm just one of those people. I love vacation. Don't get me wrong, but about 2 or 3 days into it, I'm like, man, I need to get back to work.
Yeah. I find
when
I'm on vacation, since you brought vacation up because we talked about it off the air, I find that I need it to recharge my batteries, and I love to fish. I love the outdoors.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, it's a way to unwind and unplug from the routine, and maybe some of the intensity of the legislative session and other type things that are going on.
I've got Richard in a greenhouse this morning, by the way. He's starting to get warm and roll up his sleeves. It is when the sun comes in through the windows. It kind of becomes a greenhouse.
I might be taking the shirt off in a little bit as well.
Well, we hope we're on camera, so but yeah, it's so I apologize. Maybe the air will kick on here in a second, but yeah, you're right. It is good to get away, but boy, what a nice initiative there. That's in place there for somebody to get out, and again, it brings dignity, and you never know when you find that person that walks into your business and they become that ideal employee for what your needs are. Their skills match you, so that's wonderful.
That it is, and that's part of what community is. That you've got employers who are driven to lead, but then you have employees who are part of that workplace, that initiative, and then together they're more productive, and hopefully they're producing a good product or providing a good service, and they're blessing the community. And when we have an economic climate that makes it easier to run businesses, when we have a climate that attracts new businesses, that's good for everybody, and that's what we've seen in the last couple of years here in Kentucky.
Right. Well, it's great news for the Commonwealth, not only statewide, and it's not just the Golden Triangle either. I mean, these are rural communities that are thriving and seeing business, and it might not be your 600 employee factory. It might be little mom and pops that are cropping up, but still, there's something there, and they're viable and contributing back.
Yeah,
so
that's
good stuff.
That's right. This ties into something else, another idea that I wanted to touch on this morning, and that's that the idea that government should provide everything. Last election cycle, we had some candidates saying government should provide free health care, government should provide tuition, free tuition to students, government should provide jobs. Well, there's many things actually that government should not provide. What it should provide is a level playing field. It should uphold the rule of law. It should make it easier for people to start their own businesses. But it really doesn't do well when it provides free things for some people, free things for other people. The greatest thing that our government can do for us is to secure our rights and to provide an opportunity to provide a level playing field under the rule of law so that we can go out and use our God-given gifts and abilities and do what God's made us to do. When you have governments that begin to promise things, Ty, free health care, free tuition, whatever it might be, that's when government steps into a realm that it shouldn't. We have governments like this around the world right now. And there are places that I would rather not live. You have Cuba. They provide everything under the sun. But because they provide all these things, they're taking resources from some people. They're distributing them across the board, but they have all the power. It's those few people in the Cuban government that have all the power, all the decision-making authority, and when they accumulate that, they overstep and infringe on your freedom, my freedom to choose what occupation we want, freedom to what doctor we would use, freedom to express political opinions, and that is the tendency of totalitarian governments. China, they're limited now. It's still authoritarian, but they still have infringed on the freedoms of many people. North Korea, you think that's an anomaly, but that worldview that says government can provide everything, we're going to do free education and health care, that's North Korea. Many other countries
Venezuela.
like that.
Horrible shape right now.
Good example of why we as citizens should guard our liberty and our freedom against those who make good promises, maybe well-intentioned promises, but we should guard our freedom nonetheless. And we have a mindset, another point here, and I know we're running close on time.
You're all right. You got a few more minutes.
But we need to realize that government isn't everything. When something goes wrong, there's a tendency to say, well, we need to have a bill passed. We want government to fix it, or this guy's going to fix that. Well, in some cases, you do need a law. But in many cases, because we have freedom in this country, there are other mediating institutions, like the family. So if your child is having issues, the parents should be dealing with those issues first. If not, then there should be community organizations that can help. I'm thinking of churches. Churches are mediating institutions that speak to the spiritual needs of people. You have other nonprofits like the Red Cross or the Salvation Army that meet material needs of people that need help. I just mentioned a few other organizations that don't require government involvement. So the government is not always the answer. And when government does step into these things that people can do because we have freedom, because we can organize, because we can pool our resources, because of the freedom we have, we should be able to address issues that the government can't. The other aspect of this is that when you get involved in a community group, whether it's your church or a ministry like the Salvation Army, you're adding a personal aspect of it as well. You have, as a person, you're caring, so you're offering compassion. You have interest in that other person's life. And these are things that government programs can't do. Government might be able to hand out a check, but it can't be truly compassionate. It can't offer encouragement. It can't offer hope. And that's why we've seen these poverty-reducing programs from Washington, D.C. really fail on so many levels. They've created programs, they've given out money, they've done this and that, but they have not really met the deepest needs, spoken to the deepest needs that people have that are trapped in poverty. And this is where other organizations come into play. So the point is that government not only is not the answer in many cases, but it can actually contribute to the problem. And that's what we've seen with this poverty, this war to end poverty, which started, actually was kicked off in Kentucky. Lyndon Baines Johnson, president in the 1960s, declared a war on poverty. Again, well-intentioned. I think he wanted to help people, but it did not address the deepest needs of people. So,
excellent. Last but not least, I know you've got an iPad full of notes there.
Yeah, we overall, I want to get back to the General Assembly session. Overall, it was a very positive General Assembly, and a lot of good things were happening up there. And I want to encourage the listeners to be aware of what's going on in Frankfort. Sometimes here in Western Kentucky, we feel detached or removed from what's going on there, but what they do does impact all of us.
As we've just seen.
Yeah.
7 years not funding the pension plan out of the 22. I mean, those are things that are going on under our noses.
Yeah. And many teachers here, many state workers here in the listening area. So that's a very good reason why we should be aware and then be involved. I want to encourage listeners to check out our website, commonwealthpolicycenter.org, commonwealthpolicycenter.org. We have a place to sign up on that site on the front page to get our newsletter. You can get the Commonwealth Policy Center newsletter and email updates by signing up there. It'll just ask for your name and your address. We promise we won't spam you or send you a bunch of unwanted information, but about twice a month you'll get an email from us alerting you to what is going on in Kentucky, issues of importance, and of course we're going to address these from a biblical worldview, a conservative perspective as to how we see these things. And often the news generally is from a different perspective, so it might be a fresh perspective for you if you do choose to get our updates. We also have something called the Commonwealth Minute. You can listen to that on our website, and of course it's here on the station.
It is here on Sundays, and it airs each weekday. As we get those information, it airs right before 6 o'clock, usually between 5:45 and 6 o'clock, right before we come on the air.
Okay, and those often we will talk about Kentucky news and issues, and you'll hear our perspective on that as well.
So thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure. Have we covered just about everything?
I think we've covered it all. Oh, one more thing. I guess I should mention this. I almost forgot. So one of the things the Commonwealth Policy Center does is we train candidates to run effective campaigns. We have a candidate training event coming up on May the 19th in northern Kentucky. We'll be there. That's a little bit of a drive for everybody here, but in western Kentucky, we will be here on June the 2nd. At Brothers Barbecue in Madisonville, June the 2nd, 8:30 to 1 p.m. And Lieutenant Governor Janine Hampton and myself will be presenting. And then we'll also have State Treasurer Allison Ball, Lawrence Smith, a news reporter from WDRB in Louisville, a couple of video presentations from both of those. And then we're going to do Q&A as well. So we'd love any candidate looking to run for office. And we're primarily going to talk about local races because local races really don't heat up unless you're in a primary, because those are heated up right now, but they really don't heat up until over the summer. So we're hoping to impart a toolkit and a roadmap for candidates who want to learn how to run an effective campaign. And again, it's going to be June the 2nd in Madisonville, Brothers Barbecue, 8:30 to 1 p.m. You can find information on the Commonwealth Policy Center website. Go to our homepage, click on the political tab, and there's a drop-down box, and you'll be able to pick out one of those choices is regional candidate training. And check that out, and you'll be able to find more there. I'd love to have you come. Seating is limited. I think Brothers Barbecue in their private room, they can seat about 50. So we're taking registrations right now. Again, if you're looking to run for office or thinking about running for office in the future, come on and join us on June the 2nd in Madisonville, Brothers Barbecue.
Okay, sounds great. Right. Richard, thank you so much. Always informative, and you guys work hard over there to do your thing at the Commonwealth Policy Center, and we do want to encourage you that it's always great to stay informed. It's always good, whether you think one way or the other, to take a look and get a different perspective on things. And you can do so at the Commonwealth Policy Center, www.commonwealthpolicycenter.org. Richard Nelson is here. He's been our guest. He is the director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. So it's a pleasure, and you're welcome back again. Love to have you back soon.
Thank you. Let's do it again next month.
Sounds wonderful. Right. That's going to wrap up this edition of Tiger Talk here in your hometown radio station, WPKY The Tiger. Richard Nelson has been our guest. He is the director of the Commonwealth Policy Center, and you can go to their website to find out more at www.commonwealthpolicycenter.org. We're coming up right in front of the 9 o'clock hour. Thank you so much on behalf of Richard Nelson, Ty Englebright, bidding you a good day on this Tuesday. And thank you for joining us on Tiger Talk. Remember, tomorrow's Wednesday. It's our extension program. It's Extension Wednesday on Tiger Talk. Have a good day, everybody.